In 1991, in a limestone cave near Ostuni, in southern Italy, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a young woman who had been dead for roughly 27,000 years. One of her hands rested under her head, the other rested on her belly. Inside her pelvis lay the bones of a fetus, 31 to 33 weeks along, still curled where it had been at the moment she died. For most of human history, pregnancy wasn't treated as a private medical condition to be managed quietly at home, alone, behind a closed door. It was one of the most communal, most closely attended, most publicly witnessed events a person could go through, and very often one of the most dangerous, which may be exactly why it was never left to chance or to a single pair of hands. Researchers who re-examined the burial in 2017 using synchrotron X-ray imaging at the Electra Particle Accelerator facility in Trieste scanned the fetus's developing teeth and found something specific: 3 severe episodes of physiological stress packed into the final 2.5 months of the pregnancy. Something had gone wrong, repeatedly, before the end. The woman, sometimes nicknamed Delia by the local museum, was buried wearing a cap decorated with shells, a bracelet made of cowrie shells, and tools connected to her community's daily work, treated, in death, as someone whose loss mattered enormously to the people around her. It's among the oldest documented cases of maternal death anywhere in the human record. So what did those people around her actually do, generation after generation, to try to get a pregnant woman through to the other side alive? The first answer is: they didn't leave her alone. Historically and cross-culturally, women in labor were almost never attended by a single doctor working in isolation. They were surrounded, continuously, by other women. In the late 1970s, pediatrician John Kennell and physician Marshall Klaus set out to study infant bonding and stumbled, almost by accident, onto something else entirely. When a trained companion stayed with a woman through the entirety of labor, offering nothing but continuous physical and emotional support, labor got dramatically shorter and safer. In their published trials, first-time mothers with a companion present averaged around 9 hours of labor. Without one, that number rose to 19. Continuous, not a doctor popping in every so often to check progress and leave again, someone there the whole time. The finding was, in a sense, almost redundant to report. Modern medicine had simply rediscovered what nearly every culture before the mid-20th century already assumed by default. It's the 20th century hospital, not the ancient hut, that turns out to be the odd one out in that comparison. So if company was standard for millennia, what about the physical act of giving birth itself? Ancient Babylonian carvings from as far back as 2000 BC depict women giving birth seated on specialized birthing stools with an opening cut into the seat. Temple reliefs from Esne in Upper Egypt, dated to roughly 69 to 30 BC, show Cleopatra kneeling to deliver, attended by several women. The Greek physician Cyrannus of Ephesus, writing his gynecology around the 2nd century CE, described the ideal birthing stool in careful detail: a crescent-shaped opening, arms for the mother to grip, and an attendant kneeling below to catch and support the baby while others massaged her abdomen. Squatting, kneeling, sitting, sometimes standing, cross-cultural surveys suggest a full prone or flat on the back position was used in only around 18% of documented societies throughout recorded history. It was the rare exception, not the rule. Then, in 1668, French physician François Morisot published an influential obstetric treatise recommending something different: that women lie on their backs instead of using a birthing stool, because it gave the attendant far better control and made it much easier to use forceps if labor stalled. Nobody appears to have asked the patient's opinion on the matter. There's a popular version of this story that says King Louis XIV forced the change himself because birthing stools blocked his view while he watched women in labor. It's a great story, the kind that gets repeated at dinner parties precisely because it sounds too outrageous to have been invented. According to a detailed 1987 review published in the American Journal of Public Health, it's also largely unverifiable, flattering to repeat, thin on actual evidence. What is documented is that Louis' France was simultaneously home to a famous lithotomy surgeon, operating out of the same Paris hospital that ran one of the era's largest maternity wards, and that the reclining position spread through Europe on the strength of Morisot's medical authority, not a king's curiosity. By the 1830s, American obstetricians like William Potts Dewees at the University of Pennsylvania had pushed the position even further, flat on the back entirely, on the grounds that it was simply more convenient for the physician. Convenient for the physician, not necessarily for the person giving birth. That's the part worth sitting with. The two biggest shifts away from how humans gave birth for the previous few 100,000 years, losing continuous companionship and losing an upright position, didn't happen because anyone proved they were safer. They happened because they were easier to manage from the other side of the bed. And centuries later, when researchers finally went back and tested the old assumption directly, they found the discarded defaults working better on both counts. Continuous support cut labor time nearly in half, and upright positions relieve exactly the kind of downward pressure and pain that a flat, reclined position works against, fighting gravity instead of using it. So the primitive-seeming version wasn't primitive at all. It was, by the numbers modern trials eventually produced, closer to correct the whole time. 27,000 years since a community wrapped a dead mother's head in shells and buried her with her hand still resting on her belly, refusing to treat her loss as anything less than significant. Roughly 3.5 centuries since one doctor's treatise quietly rewrote how an entire continent gave birth, for the attendant's convenience rather than the mother's. 19 hours of labor without support, 9 with it, the same finding, arrived at twice. Once by nearly every culture that came before the 17th century, and once more entirely by accident, by a pair of researchers who weren't even looking for it. Somewhere underneath a modern maternity ward, with its monitors and its scheduled epidurals, sits the same basic arrangement a cave outside Ostuni got right 27,000 years ago. Don't leave her alone, and don't fight gravity.